The snowflake that landed on my windshield at exactly 3 in the morning should have been my first warning that this February storm was going to be worse than the meteorologists predicted. But I was too busy calculating routes in my head to notice the ominous size of it. My name is Grant Xander, and I have been running Xander snow removal services in Millbrook, Colorado for the past 8 years. What started as a side hustle with a beat-up pickup truck and a rusty plow blade had grown into a legitimate operation with 3 graders, 2 heavy-duty plows, and contracts with half the subdivisions in the county. The Ridgemont Hills community was my bread and butter, a sprawling development of McMansions and winding streets that paid top dollar for priority snow removal. That night, as the storm began dumping what would eventually become 23 inches of heavy, wet snow, I was about to earn every penny of that contract. I had been monitoring the weather radar since midnight, watching the massive system crawl across the Rockies like some hungry beast. By 2:30, I knew we were in for a serious hit. I called my 2 operators, Danny and Marcus, and told them to get ready. We had a narrow window to get ahead of this thing, and if we played it right, we could keep the main arteries clear enough for emergency vehicles and early morning commuters. The grader rumbled to life beneath me as I fired up the engine in the equipment yard. The beast was a Caterpillar 140M, painted highway yellow with 30,000 pounds of American steel and determination. The blade was 12 feet wide, sharp enough to scrape down to bare pavement, and when you sat in that cab 20 feet off the ground, you felt like you could move mountains. Which, in a way, was exactly what I was about to do. Danny took the western section of Ridgemont Hills in one of our heavy plows, while Marcus handled the newer development on the eastern edge. I claimed the main roads and the tricky spots, the hills and curves that required a delicate touch and years of experience. By 4 in the morning, I was making my first pass down Mountain View Drive, the primary artery that connected Ridgemont Hills to the county road. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see 30 feet ahead, even with the grader's high-powered LED floods cutting through the darkness. The blade bit into the accumulation with a satisfying scrape, throwing cascades of white powder to the right side of the road. I had done this dance 1,000 times, the steady rhythm of advance and blade adjustment becoming almost meditative. That meditation shattered at 4:45 when I turned onto Oakmont Circle and saw the silver Lexus SUV parked dead center in the middle of the street, not pulled to the side, not in a driveway. Dead center, blocking both lanes of the curved road with its hazard lights blinking like some kind of automotive distress beacon. I eased off the throttle and brought the grader to a halt about 50 feet back, squinting through the snow to see if this was an abandoned vehicle or an accident. That is when I saw her standing next to the driver's door, arms crossed, staring up at me with the kind of expression that could curdle milk at 20 paces. I recognized her immediately. Patricia Langford, the treasurer of the Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association, and a woman whose reputation preceded her like a bad smell. In the tight-knit world of HOA politics and neighborhood drama, Patricia was legendary for all the wrong reasons. She had filed complaints against neighbors for having trash cans visible from the street on non-collection days. She had tried to fine a family for painting their front door the wrong shade of approved beige. She had called the police on kids playing basketball in their own driveway after the supposed noise curfew of 8 p.m. I lowered my window, letting in a blast of freezing air and snow. "Madam, you need to move your vehicle. I have to clear this road." Patricia took a step closer, and even through the swirling snow, I could see the self-righteous fury on her face. She was maybe 55, with severely cut blonde hair that looked like she had asked for the "I want to speak to the manager" special. And she wore a puffy North Face jacket that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. "You cannot proceed," she shouted up at me. "I am here representing the Ridgemont Hills HOA board, and we are invoking our right to deny access to this street during unsafe conditions." I blinked, certain I had misheard her over the rumble of the grader's engine. "What?" "You heard me," Patricia said, her voice taking on that particular tone that entitled people use when they think they have caught you in some imaginary violation. "The HOA board held an emergency meeting at 4:30 this morning, and we determined that operating heavy machinery during a severe storm creates unnecessary liability for the association. You need to cease operations immediately and leave the premises." For a moment, I just sat there, my brain trying to process the sheer absurdity of what I was hearing. Behind me, Oakmont Circle stretched for another half-mile, branching into 3 cul-de-sacs where at least 60 families lived. Ahead of me, the road connected to 2 more major streets that needed clearing before people started trying to drive to work. And this woman was telling me to stop plowing snow in the middle of a blizzard because of liability concerns. "Madam, with all due respect, I have a signed contract with your association," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "The board president, Michael Torres, signed it himself. I am obligated to clear these streets and, frankly, lives depend on it. If someone has a medical emergency and an ambulance cannot get through, that is actual liability." Patricia shook her head vigorously. "Michael does not speak for the entire board. This decision was made democratically, 3 votes to 2. You are trespassing on private HOA property, and if you do not leave immediately, I will call the police." I felt my jaw clench. The snow was accumulating at nearly 2 inches per hour. Every minute I sat here arguing was another minute that families were getting snowed in, that roads were becoming impassable, that my carefully planned routes were falling behind schedule. I pulled out my phone and dialed Michael Torres, the HOA president and generally reasonable human being who had signed our contract. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello, Michael. This is Xander from the Snow Removal Service. I have got Patricia Langford blocking Oakmont Circle, telling me I cannot plow. She says the board voted to stop operations." There was a long pause, then a heavy sigh. "Are you kidding me? Grant, I am sorry, we had no emergency meeting. Patricia has been trying to kill your contract since you started because she thinks her nephew should have gotten the job instead. Just ignore her and do your work." "I cannot exactly ignore her when she is parked in the middle of the street," I said, watching Patricia pull out her own phone. "She is threatening to call the cops." "Let me talk to her," Michael said. I could hear rustling as he presumably got out of bed. "Put her on." I leaned out the window. "Patricia, Michael Torres wants to talk to you." She walked over, snatched the phone from my hand with a triumphant expression, and pressed it to her ear. "Michael, I am glad you are finally awake. I am handling the situation we discussed at the meeting." I could not hear his response, but I watched Patricia's face cycle through several shades of red as Michael presumably tore into her, her mouth compressed into a thin line. "That is not what Janet told me," she said. "She specifically said we had quorum and the vote was valid." More inaudible response from Michael. Patricia's knuckles went white around my phone. "Fine," she spat. "But I want it on record that I am formally objecting to this contractor's continued employment, and when someone gets hurt because of his reckless operation of dangerous equipment, the blood is on your hands." She shoved my phone back at me and stalked toward her Lexus. I thought the problem was solved, that she would move and I could get back to work. Instead, she climbed into the SUV, turned off the hazard lights, and just sat there, engine off, right in the middle of the street. I put the phone back to my ear. "Michael, she is not moving." "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Okay, look. Technically, those streets are private HOA property, which means I cannot really authorize you to move her vehicle by force. But Grant, between you and me, we desperately need those roads cleared. If she is going to play stupid games, she wins stupid prizes. Do what you need to do and I will back you up." "You sure about that?" I asked, looking at the Lexus through the snow. "Positive. I will start making calls to the other board members. We will have an actual meeting and formally censure Patricia for this nonsense. Just get the job done." He hung up. I sat there for a moment, weighing my options. I could wait her out, but Patricia Langford struck me as the kind of woman who would sit in her car for hours just to prove a point. I could try to go around, but Oakmont Circle had houses on both sides with minimal clearance, and I would risk property damage. Or I could do what every bone in my tired, frustrated body was screaming at me to do. I revved the engine, adjusted the blade angle, and started rolling forward. Patricia apparently thought I was bluffing right up, until the grader's blade kissed the rear bumper of her Lexus with a gentle tap. Then she laid on the horn, a long, sustained blast that disappeared into the storm. I kept the pressure steady, not enough to damage anything but enough to make my intentions crystal clear. Her brake lights flared red as she apparently stood on the pedal, as if that would somehow stop 30,000 pounds of determined machinery. The Lexus began to slide forward on the snow-covered pavement, tires locked and useless. Patricia's brake lights flickered as she realized physics was not on her side. I gave the grader a little more throttle, and the SUV picked up speed, sliding across the road like a curling stone. I angled the blade slightly, steering her trajectory toward the massive snowbank that had formed on the right side of the street, where I had been piling the overflow. The Lexus hit the snowbank with a soft crump, the front end burying itself in about 3 feet of packed powder. The angle was steep enough that I knew she was not getting out without a tow truck, but gentle enough that there would be no real damage beyond maybe a cracked bumper cover. I pulled the grader to the left, went around her buried vehicle, and kept plowing. In my rearview mirror, I saw Patricia's driver door fly open. She struggled out, waist deep in snow, screaming words I could not hear over the engine noise. I did not stop. I had work to do. For the next hour, I made excellent progress through Oakmont Circle and the connecting streets. The storm was hitting its peak intensity, but I was in the zone, the grader blade throwing perfect arcs of snow to the side while I navigated the curves with practiced precision. My phone rang twice, but I ignored it. I had learned early in this business that once you stopped to answer calls during a major storm, you never got back into the rhythm. By 6:15, the sun was starting to think about rising behind the thick cloud cover, painting the world in shades of gray instead of black. I had cleared most of the priority streets and was starting on the secondary routes when I saw the police cruiser's lights flashing behind me. I pulled the grader to the side and climbed down, my boots sinking into 6 inches of fresh snow. The officer who got out was Randy Callahan, a good guy I had worked with during other storms when the police needed roads cleared for emergency response. He looked tired and not particularly happy to be standing in a blizzard. "Grant," he said with a nod. "Randy," I replied. "Let me guess." "Patricia Langford." "Yeah, she called dispatch about an hour ago, said you assaulted her with heavy machinery and destroyed her vehicle." He paused. She used the phrase attempted vehicular homicide. Despite everything, I almost laughed. She was blocking the road during a blizzard. I pushed her car out of the way, gently. Randy rubbed his face. Look, I got to file a report because she made a formal complaint, but between you and me, I already swung by and looked at her Lexus. It is stuck in a snowbank with maybe a scuffed bumper. Hardly attempted murder. Plus, dispatch has been getting calls all morning from Ridgemont Hills residents thanking you for clearing the streets. Half of them mentioned Patricia specifically, saying she has been a problem for years. So, what happens now? I asked, watching the snow accumulate on Randy's hat. I take your statement, you tell me exactly what happened, and I write it all up. Patricia will probably try to press charges, but honestly, the DA is not going to waste time on this. Worst case, it becomes a civil matter between you and her insurance company, but even that is a stretch. You were performing contracted work on private roads. She was interfering with that work, and you used minimal force to remove an obstacle. Any half-decent lawyer would tear her case apart. I walked Randy through the entire encounter while he took notes in a small waterproof notebook. Another cruiser pulled up, and a second officer got out to take photographs of the grader, presumably for evidence. The whole thing took about 20 minutes, during which time the snow kept falling, and the roads I had already cleared started accumulating fresh layers. "All right, you are free to go," Randy finally said. "But Grant, do me a favor. If you see Patricia again, just call us instead of playing demolition derby with her car, okay?" "Deal," I said, shaking his gloved hand. The officers left, and I climbed back into the grader's cab. I was behind schedule now, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. I pushed the machine hard for the next 3 hours, clearing every street and cul-de-sac in Ridgemont Hills. Danny and Marcus checked in via radio, both making good progress in their sections. By 10 in the morning, we had achieved something close to a miracle. Every major road was passable. Most of the side streets were cleared to at least one lane, and only a handful of cul-de-sacs still needed attention. I was heading back toward Mountain View Drive for another pass when I saw the tow truck working to extract Patricia's Lexus from the snowbank. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors in winter coats standing around watching. Patricia herself was there, gesticulating wildly at the tow truck operator, who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. As I rolled past, several of the neighbors waved and gave me thumbs up. One older gentleman actually saluted. Patricia saw me and her face contorted with rage, but I just kept the grader moving. I had burned enough daylight on her nonsense. The storm finally began to taper off around noon, the heavy snowfall diminishing to light flurries. I made one final pass through the main streets, scraping down to bare pavement wherever possible, then headed back to the equipment yard. Danny and Marcus were already there, looking exhausted but satisfied. We had pulled off a hell of a job under brutal conditions. "How was your morning?" Danny asked as I climbed down from the grader, my legs stiff from 9 hours in the cab. "Interesting," I said. "How about you, Smooth?" "Well, except for the 3 down tree branches I had to push out of the way. Marcus said he broke a plow shoe on Valley Road. I pushed an HOA Karen into a snowbank and might be getting sued," I said casually. They both stared at me. "You what?" Over coffee and gas station breakfast burritos in the heated office trailer, I told them the whole story. By the end, Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief, while Danny was openly laughing. "Man, Patricia Langford is notorious," Marcus said. "My cousin lives in Ridgemont Hills, and she said Patricia once tried to fine her for having Christmas lights up past January 5th. She literally went door to door with a clipboard and a camera." "Well, she has got it out for me now," I said. "But honestly, I would do the same thing again. We had a job to do, and she was actively interfering with public safety." "Private safety," Danny corrected. "HOA roads are private property." "Whatever. People's safety. That is what matters. I sent everyone home to get some rest, then settled in to handle the administrative side of the business. I emailed invoices to all our contracted communities, filed the incident report Randy had given me, and started documenting everything that had happened with Patricia. I took screenshots of the original contract with Michael Torres's signature, saved the call logs from my phone, and even drew a diagram of where Patricia had been parked and the path I had pushed her vehicle. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. Unknown number, local area code. I debated letting it go to voicemail but answered anyway. Xander Snow Removal, this is Grant. Mr. Xander, my name is Susan Miller, and I am calling from the law offices of Miller and Associates. I am representing Patricia Langford in a matter concerning damage to her vehicle and emotional distress caused by your actions this morning. Here we go, I thought. What can I do for you, Miss Miller? My client would like to resolve this matter without litigation. She is willing to accept payment for the damage to her vehicle, which our estimate places at approximately $4,500, plus an additional $5,000 for emotional distress and lost wages. In exchange, she will not pursue criminal charges or a civil lawsuit. I almost laughed. With all due respect, your client was interfering with contracted snow removal during a blizzard. I have multiple witnesses, a police report that confirms minimal damage, and a signed contract that authorized my presence on those roads. I am not paying her a dime. There was a pause. Mr. Xander, my client is quite determined. She has photographic evidence of your vehicle making contact with hers, and she is prepared to argue that you used excessive force and acted with malicious intent. Then I look forward to seeing you in court, I said. But just so you know, I have also documented everything, and I have been advised by the police that this is a frivolous complaint. Your client deliberately blocked a roadway during an emergency weather event and refused to move despite multiple requests. Any judge is going to throw this out. We shall see, Mr. Xander. Expect to be served within the week. She hung up. I sat there looking at my phone, feeling the adrenaline starting to fade and the exhaustion creeping in. I had been awake for nearly 14 hours, spent 9 of them in the grader, and now I was dealing with legal threats from a woman who had apparently never heard the phrase "play stupid games, win stupid prizes." I called my business insurance agent, a perpetually caffeinated woman named Jennifer who had handled everything from property damage claims to workers' comp for the past 5 years. She answered immediately, which was standard for Jennifer. Sleep seemed to be optional for her. Grant, how did the storm go? Great on the plowing front. Less great on the HOA Karen trying to sue me front. I explained the situation. Jennifer listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, then made a thoughtful humming noise. Okay, so first thing, do not worry too much. This is exactly why you have liability insurance. If she actually files a lawsuit, forward everything to me and I will handle it with our legal team. Second, document everything you can remember about this morning. Times, exact words if possible, weather conditions, visibility, all of it. Third, see if you can get statements from anyone who witnessed it. The HOA president will back me up, I said. And there were neighbors watching when I came back through later. Perfect. Get those statements in writing if you can. Honestly, Grant, this sounds like a nuisance suit from an entitled busybody. I doubt it goes anywhere, but if it does, we have got you covered. Your premiums are about to be worth every penny. That made me feel marginally better. I thanked her and hung up, then called Michael Torres. He answered immediately. Grant, I am so sorry about this morning. I have been fielding calls all day from board members and residents. The consensus is that Patricia went way over the line. She is threatening to sue me, I said. Her lawyer called about an hour ago demanding $9,500. Michael cursed colorfully. That woman is insane. Look, the board is having an emergency meeting tonight at 7, and one of the items on the agenda is Patricia's conduct. Several residents have filed formal complaints about her behavior, and I am pushing to have her removed as treasurer. Can you come and give your side of the story? I hesitated. The last thing I wanted after the day I had was to sit through an HOA meeting. But this was my business reputation on the line, and if Patricia started spreading lies about what happened, it could cost me contracts. Yeah, I will be there, I said. Where? Community Center, main conference room. And Grant, seriously, thank you for everything you did today. The roads look amazing, and a lot of people were able to get to work because of you. Whatever Patricia tries to pull, the community has your back. That actually meant something. I had learned early in the snow removal business that reputation was everything. You could have the best equipment and the most competitive prices, but if people did not trust you to show up and do the work, you were dead in the water. I spent the rest of the afternoon at home, trying to catch a few hours of sleep, but mostly staring at the ceiling and replaying the morning's events. Had I overreacted? Should I have just waited Patricia out or found another route? But every time I second-guessed myself, I came back to the same conclusion. She was wrong, I was right, and sometimes you have to push back against unreasonable people. The community center was packed when I arrived at 6:45. The conference room had a capacity of maybe 50 people, and there were at least 70 crammed inside with more standing in the hallway. I recognized some faces from the neighborhood, people whose driveways I had cleared over the years, residents who had waved or left coffee thermoses out for me and my crew during long storm nights. Michael Torres stood at the front near a folding table where the other board members sat. I recognized Janet Riley, the secretary, a mousy woman in her 60s who always looked nervous. Next to her was Tom Brennan, the vice president, a retired firefighter with a no-nonsense demeanor. The two other board members were David Chen, who ran an accounting firm downtown, and Patricia Langford herself, sitting with her arms crossed and a lawyer at her side. The meeting started with standard HOA business, approval of minutes and treasurer's report and discussion of landscaping contracts for the spring. I stood in the back, leaning against the wall, watching the clock tick toward the agenda item I cared about. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. Okay, we need to address the incident that occurred this morning during the snowstorm. For those who are not aware, there was an altercation between our contracted snow removal operator and a board member. Grant Xander, would you come forward and explain what happened? I walked to the front, acutely aware of dozens of eyes on me. I am not naturally comfortable with public speaking, but I kept my voice steady and walked through the timeline, finding Patricia blocking the road, the phone call with Michael, her refusal to move, the decision to push her vehicle out of the way. I kept it factual, no editorial commentary, just what happened and when. When I finished, Patricia immediately shot to her feet. That is a gross mischaracterization of events. This man threatened me, damaged my vehicle, and showed complete disregard for my safety. He is a menace who should be banned from our community immediately. Patricia, you will have your turn to speak, Michael said firmly, but first I want to hear from residents. Anyone who has comments about this morning's snow removal or Patricia's actions, please raise your hand. Nearly every hand in the room went up. For the next 30 minutes, I stood there while resident after resident spoke. Some thanked me for clearing the roads quickly and professionally. Others shared their own stories of Patricia's harassment and petty tyranny. One woman talked about how Patricia had reported her teenage son to the police for skateboarding on the sidewalk. A man described how Patricia had tried to ban his daughter's lemonade stand for operating an unlicensed business. Another couple explained how Patricia had called Child Protective Services on them because their kids played outside unsupervised. The stories piled up, each one painting a picture of a woman who had used her HOA position to bully and control her neighbors for years. By the time the public comment period ended, Patricia's face was the color of a ripe tomato, and her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear. Michael called for a vote on whether to remove Patricia as treasurer and suspend her from the board pending a full investigation. Janet and David immediately voted yes. Tom Brennan voted yes with a curt nod. Patricia obviously voted no, and she stared daggers at her fellow board members. "Motion carries, 4-1, Michael said. Patricia, effective immediately, you are removed from your position as treasurer and suspended from all board activities. We will conduct a full review of your conduct over the past year, and the board will determine if further action is warranted." Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell over. "This is illegal. You cannot remove me without cause." "We have cause," Tom Brennan said, his firefighter authority showing through. "You deliberately interfered with emergency services during a weather crisis. You made false claims about an assault, and we have documented evidence of harassment against multiple residents. The HOA bylaws are very clear about removal for conduct unbecoming a board member." "I will sue all of you," Patricia hissed. "I will sue the HOA, I will sue him," she pointed at me, "and when I am done, this community will be bankrupt." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her down, but Patricia shook him off. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the conference room, her heels clicking angrily on the linoleum floor. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. It spread through the crowd until nearly everyone was applauding. Michael banged a gavel. "All right, settle down. We still have business to conduct. Grant, thank you for your service today and for coming tonight. The board formally apologizes for Patricia's behavior, and we want to assure you that your contract is secure." "Thank you," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I appreciate the support." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely paid attention. I was too busy processing everything that had happened, from the pre-dawn confrontation to this moment of vindication. When Michael finally adjourned, I was swarmed by residents wanting to shake my hand or thank me personally. It was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. I drove home that night feeling cautiously optimistic. Patricia had been dealt a serious blow, and the community had my back. But I also knew that people like her did not just go away quietly. She had threatened lawsuits, and her lawyer had been taking notes throughout the meeting. This was not over. Sure enough, 3 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. A process server showed up at the equipment yard and handed me a thick manila envelope containing Patricia's formal complaint. She was suing me for property damage, emotional distress, lost wages, and something called tortious interference with HOA governance. The total damages she was seeking had somehow ballooned to $50,000. I called Jennifer, my insurance agent, and forwarded her everything. She assured me again that this was standard operating procedure for someone like Patricia, that frivolous lawsuits happened more often than people realized, and that the insurance company's lawyers would handle everything. Still, it was stressful having that hanging over my head. The next week brought more snow, thankfully without any Patricia-related drama. I cleared Ridgemont Hills without incident, and several residents left thank you notes and gift cards in their mailboxes for me. It was those small kindnesses that reminded me why I loved this job, despite the early mornings and the difficult people. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a call from a detective with the Millbrook Police Department. His name was Detective Frank Morrison, and he had a gravelly voice that suggested too many years of smoking. "Mr. Xander, I am investigating a complaint filed by Patricia Langford regarding events that occurred during the February snowstorm. I would like to ask you some questions if you have time." My stomach dropped. I already gave a statement to Officer Callahan that morning. "I am aware. This is a follow-up. Miss Langford has been quite persistent, and we need to make sure we have dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's. Can you come down to the station tomorrow?" I agreed, though I did not like it. The next morning, I found myself sitting in a small interview room at the Millbrook Police Department, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while Detective Morrison reviewed his notes. "Walk me through what happened one more time," he said. I did, giving the same factual account I had given Randy Callahan and the HOA board. Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally writing something down. "Did you at any point feel threatened by Miss Langford?" he asked. "Threatened?" "No. Annoyed, definitely. She was interfering with my work and putting people at risk by blocking the road, but I did not feel physically threatened." "And why did you decide to push her vehicle instead of calling the police?" "Because every minute I waited was another minute that roads were becoming impassable. I had already spoken to the HOA president, who confirmed I had authority to be there and that Patricia was acting on her own. It seemed like the most practical solution." Morrison nodded slowly. "Miss Langford claims you acted with malicious intent, that you were trying to intimidate and harm her. That is ridiculous. If I wanted to harm her, I could have. That grader weighs 15 tons. I pushed her gently into a snowbank. There was barely any damage to her vehicle." "She also claims you have been harassing her since the incident, driving past her house multiple times and making threatening gestures." That caught me off guard. "What?" "I have been doing my job, which includes plowing the streets she lives on. If she interprets that as harassment, that is on her." Morrison studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Xander, off the record, I think Miss Langford is wasting everyone's time. We have got real crimes to investigate, and this petty HOA drama is not one of them. But she has been calling the chief directly, and she has got a lawyer making noise, so we have to take it seriously. My recommendation is going to be that no charges are filed. You acted reasonably under the circumstances, and there is no evidence of criminal intent." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Detective. But," he held up a finger, "I would strongly advise you to avoid any contact with Miss Langford going forward. If she is on the street, wait for her to move or find another route. Do not give her any ammunition to claim harassment or intimidation. People like her thrive on conflict, and the best thing you can do is starve her of it." I promised I would, and Morrison walked me out. As I left the police station, I felt like I had dodged a bullet. The criminal side of this mess was apparently over, but the civil lawsuit was still pending. March came, and with it more snow. Colorado's spring weather is notoriously unpredictable, and we got hit with 3 more significant storms before April finally brought warmer temperatures. Each time, I plowed Ridgemont Hills without incident. I never saw Patricia, though I heard through the grapevine that she had moved in with a sister in Denver while her house was on the market. The lawsuit dragged on. Patricia's lawyer kept filing motions and requesting extensions, apparently hoping to wear me down or run up costs. But my insurance company's legal team was relentless. They deposed Patricia, deposed Michael Torres, deposed several Ridgemont Hills residents who had witnessed the aftermath. They gathered weather reports, photographs of Patricia's minimally damaged Lexus, and copies of my contract. In late April, I got a call from the lead attorney handling my case, a sharp woman named Rachel Park. "Grant, I have got good news. Patricia's lawyer reached out about settlement discussions." "I thought she was demanding $50,000, I said. "She was. Now they are asking for $5,000. And between you and me, I think we can get them down to nothing if we push. The discovery process has not been kind to her case. We found emails where she discussed wanting to get you fired so her nephew could get the snow removal contract. We have testimony from multiple neighbors about her pattern of harassment, and the photos of her vehicle show almost no damage. Her lawyer knows this is a loser case, and he is trying to salvage something so he does not look completely incompetent." "What do you recommend?" I asked. "I say we offer to settle for mutual dismissal with prejudice, meaning neither party can refile these claims. You pay nothing, she admits nothing, and everyone goes their separate ways. If she refuses, we go to trial, and I am very confident we win." "Let's do it," I said. I just wanted this nightmare over. 2 weeks later, I signed the settlement agreement. Patricia agreed to dismiss her lawsuit in exchange for me agreeing not to countersue for frivolous litigation. It felt anticlimactic after months of stress, but I was just relieved to close that chapter. The HOA board formally apologized in writing and gave my company a bonus for the exceptional work during the February storms. Michael Torres personally called to thank me and let me know that Patricia had sold her house and moved permanently to Denver. Several residents told me they had never seen the community so united as when they had come together to push back against her tyranny. Summer arrived, and with it the off-season for snow removal. I spent those months maintaining equipment, bidding on new contracts, and trying not to think about Patricia Langford. But the story had taken on a life of its own in the local snow removal community. Other contractors started calling me the greater guy, and I got invited to speak at a Colorado Snow Removal Association meeting about handling difficult clients. It was at that meeting in July, standing in front of 50 other contractors in a Denver hotel conference room, that I realized something important. What had happened with Patricia was not just about one entitled HOA board member. It was about the power dynamics that exist in communities, about how petty tyrants thrive when good people stay silent, and about the importance of standing up for what is right even when it is uncomfortable. "So here is what I learned," I told the assembled contractors. "Document everything. Every contract, every phone call, every interaction with clients. Build relationships with the reasonable people in the communities you serve, because they will back you up when things go sideways. And most importantly, do not let bullies push you around." I could have backed down that morning, let Patricia block the road and walk away from the contract. But I knew that families depended on those streets being clear, and I knew I had the legal and moral authority to do my job. So I did it. The applause was genuine, and afterward, several contractors came up to share their own stories about dealing with difficult HOA boards. It seemed like Patricia Langford was not unique, just an extreme example of a common problem. August brought the first hints of fall, and with it, the knowledge that winter would return eventually. I started preparing for another season, hiring 2 new drivers to expand operations and bidding on contracts for the upcoming year. Ridgemont Hills renewed without hesitation, and I picked up 3 new subdivisions based on referrals from satisfied clients. In September, I got an unexpected call from Detective Morrison. "Mr. Xander, I thought you might want to know that Patricia Langford was arrested last week in Denver." "For what?" I asked, surprised. Turns out she had been running a pretty sophisticated embezzlement scheme through the Ridgemont Hills HOA. When the new treasurer took over and started auditing the books, they found almost $80,000 in unauthorized transactions over the past 3 years. Miss Langford had been writing checks to fake vendors and pocketing the money. I let out a low whistle. Wow. The Denver DA is charging her with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Given the amount involved, she is looking at serious prison time if convicted. I thought you should know since she put you through hell over that plowing incident. Thanks for the heads up, detective. After we hung up, I sat in my office chair, staring out the window at the late summer sunshine. Patricia had not just been a petty tyrant. She had been a criminal, stealing from her neighbors while using her HOA position to bully anyone who might question her authority. The February storm had been her downfall in more ways than one. If I had backed down that morning, if the community had not united against her, the embezzlement might never have been discovered. The case went to trial in November. I did not attend, but Michael Torres kept me updated. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence, including bank records, forged documents, and testimony from forensic accountants. Patricia's defense was weak, arguing that she had intended to pay the money back and that the HOA's accounting practices were disorganized. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. In January, almost exactly 1 year after the snowstorm that had started everything, Patricia Langford was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the Ridgemont Hills HOA. I read about it in the local newspaper over breakfast, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She had brought it all on herself, but it was still a cautionary tale about how unchecked power and entitlement could destroy lives. That same day, the first major storm of the new winter season rolled into Millbrook. I fired up the grader at 3 in the morning, watching the snow begin to fall, and headed out to clear the streets of Ridgemont Hills. The roads were empty except for the snow and my machine, the blade scraping clean lines through the accumulation while I worked my way through the familiar routes. When I turned onto Oakmont Circle, I thought about that morning a year ago. Patricia's Lexus blocking the road. The confrontation. The decision to push her out of the way. Everything that had followed, good and bad. But this time, the street was clear. No cars parked in stupid places, no HOA board members trying to stop me from doing my job. Just snow and pavement and the satisfying rhythm of the work I loved. A few residents were awake despite the early hour, lights glowing warm in their windows. One man came out in his bathrobe to wave as I passed, and I flashed the grader's headlights in acknowledgement. These were the moments that made it all worthwhile. Not the drama or the lawsuits or the vindication, but the simple fact that when people woke up that morning, they would be able to get to work, take their kids to school and live their lives because I had been there to clear the way. By the time the sun rose, Ridgemont Hills was plowed clean. I made one final pass down Mountain View Drive, the grader's blade gleaming in the winter light, and headed back to the yard. Danny and Marcus were waiting with coffee and breakfast sandwiches, already swapping stories about the night's work. "Smooth operation," Danny said. "No problems." "Same," Marcus added. "Unlike last year, we all laughed and I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. To no more HOA Karens blocking the roads." "Amen to that," Danny said. But as I drank my coffee and felt the warmth spread through my tired body, I realized I would not trade that experience for anything. It had tested me, stressed me, and ultimately made me a better operator and a better businessman. I had learned to document everything, to build community relationships, and to stand firm when I knew I was right. Those lessons were worth more than any easy contract or uneventful winter season. The weeks that followed brought more storms, more long nights in the grader, and more satisfied clients. The business continued to grow, my reputation solidified by the way I had handled the Patricia situation. Other HOAs reached out specifically because they had heard I would not back down from difficult board members, that I prioritized safety over politics. In February, on the anniversary of the original incident, the Ridgemont Hills HOA threw a community appreciation event. They invited all the service providers who kept the neighborhood running, landscapers, trash collectors, maintenance workers, and yes, the snow removal team. My crew and I attended, feeling slightly out of place at the fancy reception in the community center. Michael Torres made a speech thanking everyone for their dedication, and he specifically mentioned the February storm and how the community had come together during a difficult time. He did not name Patricia, but everyone knew what he was talking about. Several residents came up afterward to shake my hand and take pictures with me in front of the grader, which I had parked outside as a sort of guest of honor. An elderly woman named Margaret approached me near the end of the evening. She had lived in Ridgemont Hills for 20 years and remembered when Patricia first joined the HOA board. "I want to thank you for standing up to her," Margaret said quietly. "A lot of us were afraid. She had this way of making you feel small, like any little thing you did was wrong. After what happened with you, after the board removed her and the truth came out about the money, it was like the whole neighborhood could breathe again." "I was just doing my job," I said. "Maybe," Margaret smiled. "But sometimes doing your job means standing up to bullies. That takes courage, especially when they have power over you." I thought about that conversation a lot in the months that followed. Had what I did really been courageous or just practical? I still was not sure. But I knew that I had made the right choice that snowy morning, and that was enough. As another winter season wound down and spring arrived in Colorado, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The snowstorm, the confrontation, the lawsuit, Patricia's arrest and conviction. It all seemed surreal in hindsight, like something that had happened to someone else. But the lessons had stuck with me, woven into the fabric of how I approached my work and my life. The snow removal business kept growing. We added another grader and expanded into neighboring counties. I hired more operators, trained them not just in the technical aspects of the job, but in the people skills required to navigate HOA politics and difficult clients. I started teaching them what I called the Patricia principle. Document everything, know your rights, and never let unreasonable people prevent you from doing what needs to be done. Years passed, and the story became something of a legend in the local contracting community. New operators would hear about the time Xander pushed an HOA Karen into a snowbank and ask if it was true. I would confirm it was, then explain the context and the consequences. Some found it funny, others found it instructive, but everyone agreed that it represented something important about standing your ground. Patricia Langford served her time, and I heard through the grapevine that she eventually moved to another state after her release. I never saw or spoke to her again, which was fine by me. Some bridges are better left burned. Ridgemont Hills thrived without her toxic influence. The HOA board became more transparent and responsive to residents. Community events increased, neighbors became friendlier, and the whole atmosphere of the development improved. It turned out that removing one bad actor could have cascading positive effects throughout an entire community. As for me, I continued doing what I loved, clearing snow, building my business, and serving the communities that depended on my work. Every winter brought new challenges, but none quite as dramatic as that February morning when I faced down Patricia Langford and her Lexus. And while I would not wish for another confrontation like that, I was grateful for the experience and the growth it forced upon me. The grader still sits in my equipment yard, freshly painted and maintained, ready for the next storm. Sometimes I climb into the cab just to sit there, remembering that feeling of determination and resolve as I pushed through the blizzard and the obstacles in my path. It reminds me that we all face moments where we have to choose between backing down or standing firm, between avoiding conflict or doing what is right. I chose to stand firm. I chose to do my job despite the interference and the threats. And in the end, that choice led to justice, not just for me but for an entire community that had suffered under Patricia's abuse of power. The snow will fall again. It always does in Colorado. And when it does, I will be there in my grader, blades sharp and ready, clearing the way for people to live their lives. No HOA Karens, no unnecessary drama, just honest work done well. That is all I ever wanted, and that is what I will continue to provide for as long as I am able. The end of Patricia's reign and her subsequent conviction brought closure to a chapter I never expected to live through. But it also opened new chapters, new opportunities, and new relationships within the community. I became more than just the snow removal guy. I became someone people could count on to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. And that, more than any contract or payment or recognition, is what made the whole experience worthwhile. Because at the end of the day, we are defined not by the obstacles we face, but by how we choose to confront them. Patricia Langford was my obstacle that snowy February morning. The grader was my tool. And the choice to push forward, quite literally, was mine to make. I made it. And I would make it again.